All right, welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. Today we're gonna look at something kind of interesting, I think. We're gonna look at this problem of saving energy at home, like how to use less energy without it feeling like a huge sacrifice or making our lives super complicated, I think for our listeners who are already pretty familiar with this topic, I think what we want to do is we want to dive deep into this one particular approach that I think is particularly clever.
Yeah.
We're gonna go, we're gonna go deep on the details, so you can walk away really feeling like an expert on this one kind of niche approach. But I think it's a really promising one.
Yeah, for sure. I think this deep dive is really for that listener who wants to, get the key ideas quickly but deeply without sort of being overwhelmed by all the detail.
Right.
So yeah, good way to put it. We're looking at this new approach to energy efficiency that's really interesting, almost like a subtle nudge in the right direction rather than a forceful push.
Yeah.
Sort of like having a friend who gently reminds you to turn off the lights when you leave a room.
Yeah.
Without, making you feel bad about it.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at today specifically is this idea of using real-time messages to make people more aware of how much energy they're using, right then and there, and to suggest ways they could save energy without being too intrusive, too annoying.
Right.
And the really interesting thing is we're going to be digging into an academic paper that uses something called agent-based modeling to test how well this could actually work. So it's not just theory, it's like they actually simulated it.
Yeah, it's a really neat approach.
But before we get into all that, I think it's important to set the stage. Why do we even need this kind of solution? I think everybody listening probably already knows, that energy use in homes is a big deal. It's a huge chunk of our overall energy footprint, right?
Absolutely. I mean, residential energy consumption is a significant contributor.
Yeah.
And the challenge is that, the traditional ways that we try to address this often don't quite get it right.
Right. They kind of fall short.
They fall short.
So, I mean, you think about those displays that show you how much energy you're using, right? Like maybe you have a little screen in your kitchen or something. Mm-hmm. Those are good for awareness, but they often present the information in a way that's just hard to act on, right? It's kind of like they show you a bunch of numbers, maybe some graphs, but it's just data, right? It's not really telling you why you're using so much energy or what you can actually do about it. Mm-hmm. Like it's kind of like getting your total calorie count for the day, but at the end of the day. Like that's interesting, but what am I supposed to do with that now?
Yeah. It's like, it's good to be aware of it, but it's not really helpful for making better choices throughout the day.
You're right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the research we're going to be talking about today, it actually emphasizes that people want more context, right?
Yes.
It's not enough to just know that you used a certain number of kilowatt hours. People want to understand why, what contributed to that usage. Was it because they had guests over? Was it because they left the heating on by mistake? They want to understand the reasons behind the numbers.
They want the story behind the numbers, not just the numbers themselves.
Exactly. And there's even research suggesting that linking energy use to specific activities or rooms in the house, like, hey, you use this much energy in the kitchen this morning, or you use this much energy while watching TV, can be really powerful, because it makes it more relatable, it makes it more actionable. Right. Whereas those traditional feedback systems often treat people like they're data analysts, expecting them to decipher all this information and figure out what to do about it on their own.
Right. It's kind of overwhelming.
Right. It's like,
here's all this data. Go figure it out.
You're on your own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got these things called energy management systems, or EMS, right?
Right.
And these often focus on automation, like controlling your thermostat or appliances automatically to save energy. And that sounds great, right? Like, who wouldn't want less effort and more savings?
Right. On the surface, it seems like a dream. Yeah. Yeah. But this research that we're looking at, it actually highlights a potential downside of that automation approach. And it's this idea that people can start to feel like they're losing control of their own homes.
Mm-hmm. That lack of control.
Yeah. And they actually cite this real-world example, the Power Matching City project.
Oh, well, right. Yeah.
And what they found in that project was that people actually preferred to have more interaction, more say in how the energy system worked, rather than just letting complete automation take over.
Right. It's interesting, isn't it? It's like, yeah, you would think that full automation would be the ideal, but there's something about feeling in control.
Yeah.
That's important to people.
Yeah, it makes a difference. And plus, without that awareness, without that understanding of what's happening, you can run into this thing called the rebound effect.
Oh, right, yeah.
Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah, the rebound effect, yeah.
So the idea is, if you have an appliance that's automated to save energy, you might actually start using it more because you think, oh, well, it's saving me energy anyway, so it doesn't matter if I use it more. But then you end up negating those savings because you're using it so much more.
Right. Like I know this happens with like programmable thermostats sometimes.
Right.
Where people will set the temperature really low because they think, oh, well, it'll warm up automatically later. Mm-hmm. And then they end up using more energy overall. Yeah,
exactly. So it's kind of a counterintuitive effect.
Mm-hmm.
So what this research proposes is a different path. It's not about bombarding people with data or taking away their control. It's about this idea of an energy messaging intervention.
Right.
And as I understand it, the basic idea is to send people, simple real-time messages about energy being wasted, but right now, like in that moment.
Right.
And then to couple that with a suggestion for what they can do about it.
Yeah.
So like, imagine you get a little message on your phone that says, hey, the TV in the living room has been on for the last 15 minutes, but no one's in there.
Right.
Or looks like the lights are on in the hallway, but it's pretty bright outside.
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of simple nudges in the moment that can help you, save energy without feeling like the system is taking over.
Right. And it's not the system turning things off automatically.
Right, exactly.
Like you were saying, it's still giving the occupant, the person living there, the control.
Yes.
It's just giving them the information they need to make that decision.
Exactly. It's empowering them.
Mm-hmm.
And the researchers suggest that this kind of intervention, it can actually leverage a lot of the sensing and analysis technologies that are already, becoming pretty common in homes, like smart plugs and motion sensors and stuff like that. So it's not some futuristic thing. It's something that could be, implemented pretty readily.
Right. It's building on what's already out there.
Exactly.
And I think what's really clever about this approach is this focus on making it non-intrusive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We all know how quickly notifications can become annoying.
Oh, yeah.
If you're getting bombarded with messages all the time, you just start ignoring them.
Right. You just tune them out.
Exactly.
Right.
So the researchers have developed what they call a heuristic, which is basically a set of guidelines to manage when and how often these messages are sent so that it doesn't become, overwhelming.
Right.
So it's really about finding that sweet spot,
Yeah.
between being effective and being, respectful of people's attention.
Right. So to test this idea out, to see if it could actually work, the researchers, they built this really cool tool, this layered agent-based model, which they call an ABM.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar with agent-based modeling, you can think of it like a really advanced version of The Sims, but for energy use,
Right.
So instead of you directly controlling each character, the researchers, they set rules for how these virtual people behave in their homes, and then they see what patterns emerge in their energy consumption and how they respond to these messages.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's like a virtual laboratory.
Right.
Where you can test out different ideas and see how they play out.
And ABM is really valuable here because human behavior, it's not always predictable, right?
Messy.
Yeah, it's messy. Like, we don't all react the same way to the same situation.
Right.
So ABM allows the researchers to model that complexity, those individual differences and interactions.
Mm-hmm.
And they can do it in a way that traditional, like, statistical methods they can't really capture.
Right.
So they can really see the big picture by looking at the actions of lots of these individual agents, the simulated occupants of the homes.
Right. It gives them a much more nuanced view.
Exactly. Yeah. So we've talked about why this kind of solution is needed. We've talked about the limitations of those traditional approaches. Mm-hmm. We've talked about how agent-based modeling works. So let's dive into the messaging intervention itself. Like, what are the key ingredients that make this proposed method different and hopefully more effective?
Okay, so one of the most important things is that it focuses on detecting actual instances of energy waste.
Okay.
So the paper initially focuses on what they call presence-dependent appliances.
Mm-hmm.
So these are things like TVs, computers, lights, those kinds of things.
Okay.
Because the waste associated with these is often pretty obvious.
Right, like it's on, but no one's using it.
Exactly. It's running when no one is using it.
Okay, so how does the system actually figure out when that kind of waste is happening?
Right.
Like, that seems more complicated than just knowing if an appliance is on or off, right?
Right. So it needs context. The system needs to have information about, whether someone is actually in the room, what they might be doing, and even environmental factors like the amount of natural light.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So, for example, a light being on at night when someone is reading, that's perfectly reasonable.
Makes sense.
But the same light on in an empty room during a sunny afternoon, well, that's the kind of event that the system would flag as potential waste.
Okay. So it's not just about the appliance itself. It's about the whole context, the situation.
Exactly. It's about understanding the bigger picture.
Okay. And you mentioned this messages pushing strategy, to make sure it's not intrusive.
Right.
How does that actually work in practice?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The researchers, they've put a lot of thought into the optimal timing and frequency of these messages.
Mm-hmm.
So for timing, they suggest that the best time to send a notification is often when someone is transitioning between activities or moving from one room to another.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
So think about it. You're more likely to notice and act on a suggestion when you're already in a state of change.
Right.
Like you're already kind of, reevaluating what you're doing.
Right. You're in between things.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
So it's kind of a natural moment to nudge people.
Okay. That's really clever. So what about the frequency? How do they prevent us from just being constantly bombarded with these messages?
Right. So they have this concept of a daily frequency cap.
Okay.
And this is tailored to each individual occupant.
Okay.
So it's not like everyone gets the same number of messages.
Right.
It depends on two main things. How often that person typically moves between activities and locations in the house. So they call that the transition frequency.
Okay.
And then the second thing is their general level of interest in saving energy, which is determined by what they call occupant types.
Okay, occupant types. Tell me about these occupant types.
So they've developed this classification system.
Okay.
And they have categories like follower green.
Yeah, okay.
Which is someone who's like highly motivated to save energy.
Okay, yeah.
And then they have all the way to disengaged waster.
Oh, okay. All right.
Which is someone who's much less concerned.
Yeah.
And then there's several types in between.
Okay, yeah.
And each of these occupant types is given a weighting, which reflects how likely they are to actually be receptive to these energy-saving messages.
Right.
So someone who's classified as a follower green might have a higher daily allowance for messages.
Okay. Yeah.
Than someone who's a disengaged waster.
Makes sense. So how do they actually calculate this daily limit?
So they use a formula that takes into account the number of transitions a person made on the previous day or over the past week, and then they multiply that by the weighting that's associated with their occupant type. And so that gives them this total frequency allowance, which is then used to figure out the daily limit. So it's a dynamic system. It adapts to the individual's behavior patterns and their presumed level of interest in saving energy.
Okay. So someone who's naturally more active around the house and is really keen on saving energy might get more messages, whereas someone who's, less active and less engaged might get fewer.
Right, exactly.
Okay. And what about making sure that these messages don't all come at once, Like, you don't want to get a flood of notifications first thing in the morning.
Right. So the system also distributes the messages throughout the day.
Okay.
So it looks at the remaining messaging capacity for that person. So how many messages they have left for the day.
Okay.
And it also considers the anticipated number of waste incidents that are likely to occur. And then based on all of that, it adjusts the number of messages that are sent at each time interval to try to maintain a balanced delivery, but also prioritizing those instances where the waste is the most significant.
Okay. So it's really trying to be smart about when it sends those messages.
Right. It's not just randomly sending them out.
Right. And I noticed in the outline that there's also this thing about the system adjusting the number of people in a household who are actively targeted with messages based on how well the family is doing overall towards reaching their energy-saving goal. Like, how does that play into this whole non-intrusiveness thing?
Yeah, so that's another really interesting aspect of this.
Yeah.
So the idea is that if a household as a whole is doing well, they're meeting their targets, the system can actually reduce the number of individuals that it's sending messages to.
Oh, okay.
So it's like, okay, things are going well, we can ease up a little bit.
Right.
Avoid those unnecessary reminders.
Yeah.
But then conversely, if the household is falling behind on their goals, then the system might actually increase the number of occupants that are being targeted to try to encourage more widespread energy-saving behavior.
Okay. So it's really sensitive to the dynamics of the whole household.
Right. It's not just treating each person in isolation.
Right. It's really taking a holistic approach. And the research also mentions this model called the MOA model, which stands for motivation, opportunity, and ability. And they talk about it in the context of energy consumption. So how does this messaging intervention fit into that MOA model?
Okay, so the MOA model is basically a framework for understanding the factors that influence whether someone will actually adopt a particular behavior, like saving energy.
Okay.
So motivation refers to their desire to do it. Opportunity means having the resources and the circumstances to do it.
Okay.
And then ability is having the knowledge and the skills to do it.
Okay.
So the researchers argue that this messaging intervention, it primarily works by enhancing a person's opportunity and ability to save energy.
Okay. How does it actually do that?
So by providing this clear, understandable information about when energy is being wasted, and then offering very specific suggestions for what to do about it, it's giving people the opportunity to take action.
Okay.
They're not just being told they're using too much energy. They're being told, here's exactly what you can do to reduce your usage right now.
Right.
And it also increases their ability because it makes them more aware of when and how they're actually wasting energy. They might not have even realized that they left the TV on or that there was enough daylight to turn off the lights.
Right.
So it's kind of removing those informational barriers.
Okay, yeah. It's like it's shining a light on those blind spots.
Right, exactly.
Okay, yeah. And to represent those MOA factors in their simulation model, they use this thing called a personal energy rating, or PER. So what is that exactly?
So the PER is basically an attribute that's assigned to each of those simulated occupants in the model.
Okay.
And it represents their underlying motivation, opportunity, and ability to save energy.
Okay.
And this PER, it influences how likely they are to pay attention to the messages they receive and to actually comply with them.
Okay. So it's kind of like a measure of their overall energy consciousness, you could say.
Right. Yeah, it's capturing that individual difference.
Okay. Now, all this sounds really great in theory, but what kind of technology would we actually need in our homes to make this kind of messaging intervention a reality? Like, what would it take to actually implement this?
Okay, so the researchers, they outlined several key enabling technologies.
Okay.
So first and foremost, you need appliance-level energy monitoring. So this could be done with things like smart plugs that track the energy usage of individual devices, smart appliances that can actually report their own status and consumption, or even more advanced techniques like non-intrusive load monitoring, which is called NIL.
Okay, NILL.
Yeah, and NILM is basically a way for the system to figure out which appliances are running just by analyzing the overall electrical current that's coming into the house.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Okay.
So it's pretty clever.
So the system needs to know like which appliance is on and how much energy it's using.
Right, exactly.
Okay, what else is important?
Okay, so another thing is comprehensive environmental monitoring.
Okay.
So this would involve various sensors that can detect things like temperature, humidity, and very importantly for this intervention, the illuminance. Or the amount of natural light in different rooms.
Okay.
So you need sensors to measure that, and then also motion sensors.
Right.
Or even data that's gleaned from smartwatches or other wearable devices to help figure out if someone is present in a room and what they might be doing.
Okay.
And the researchers even talk about the potential of using what they call virtual sensors.
Virtual sensors, okay.
Yeah, so these could tap into external data sources like weather forecasts.
Oh, interesting.
Or even our digital calendars and schedules to provide even more context.
Okay. So like knowing if someone has a meeting scheduled at home might influence how the system interprets their energy use.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because, if they're expecting someone to be home soon, then that changes things.
Right. And so all this raw data, how does that get processed and transformed into those helpful messages?
Right. So that's where artificial intelligence comes in.
AI.
So AI techniques like Bayesian networks and other machine learning models can analyze all that data from all the sensors to recognize patterns of activity, to detect those instances of energy waste, and even predict future energy consumption behaviors.
Wow.
And AI is particularly important for things like NIM, to accurately figure out how much energy each appliance is using.
Okay.
And then, of course, you need communication platforms like your home Wi-Fi network, Zigbee, or other Internet of Things, IoT protocols.
Okay, yeah.
To allow all these devices to communicate with each other.
Right.
And with the central processing system.
So it sounds like a pretty sophisticated, interconnected smart home setup.
Yeah, it is.
And the research actually presents this general architecture for an energy management system that could support this kind of intervention, right?
Exactly.
So what does that look like?
So typically it would have, a sensory infrastructure to collect the data, a middleware layer to manage communication between the devices, a processing engine, which would probably be in the cloud or on a powerful local device to analyze the data and identify the waste.
Okay.
And then a user interface, most likely a smartphone app, to actually deliver the messages to the people and to potentially get feedback from them.
Okay. So it's a pretty complex system, but it's built on a lot of technologies that already exist.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked about the what and the how of this intervention, but now let's get into the testing part.
Okay.
So you mentioned this layered agent-based model, the ABM. Can you break down those layers and explain what each one is actually simulating?
Okay, yeah. So the model is quite intricate. It's designed to capture those different aspects of energy consumption and how behavior can change. And there's three main layers.
Okay.
The first one, which they call the daily behavior submodel, this is the foundation. And this simulates, like in minute detail, how people move through their day, the activities they engage in, and as a result, how much energy they consume.
Okay.
And this simulation, it happens in these really short 10-minute intervals and at the level of individual appliances.
Wow, 10-minute intervals. That's really granular.
It is, yeah.
So how do they ensure that this simulated daily behavior is actually realistic, how do they make sure it reflects how people actually live their lives?
Right. So they've integrated the ABM with this probabilistic model that's based on real-world time use survey data that was collected in Belgium.
Okay, from real people.
From real people, yeah.
Okay.
And these surveys, they provide a ton of information on how people spend their time, broken down by factors like age, employment status, day of the week, time of day, all those kinds of things. And so by using these probabilities, they can generate really realistic patterns of when people are home, what they're likely to be doing, and therefore which appliances they're likely to be using. And the researchers, they actually did some validation tests on the model's occupancy data, comparing it against the original probabilistic model, and they found really strong agreement.
Okay. Which
gives them confidence that this first layer is actually capturing reality pretty well.
Okay. So it's not just like making up behavior. It's actually grounded in real data about how people live their lives.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so what about the second layer of the ABM? What does that simulate?
Okay, so the second layer is the peer pressure submodel.
Okay, peer pressure. Interesting.
Yeah. So this is where they introduce this social dynamic into the simulation.
Okay.
So it models how family members can actually influence each other's energy consumption behaviors.
Okay.
And this is based on established social psychology theories like collective behavior and cognitive dissonance.
Okay, so peer pressure in the context of energy saving, that's pretty fascinating. So how does that work in the model? Like, how do they simulate peer pressure?
Okay, so the model, It keeps track of each occupant's occupant type. So those categories we talked about before.
Right. Follower green, disengaged waster.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then it assesses the difference between an individual's own occupant type and the average occupant type of the other members of their household.
Okay.
And if that difference is big enough, if it exceeds a certain threshold, it can trigger a gradual shift in the individual's own occupant type.
Oh, interesting.
So basically it nudges them towards the prevailing behaviors of the majority in their family.
Okay.
And it's not an immediate change, it's a gradual evolution, which reflects the idea that, people's habits and attitudes are influenced by those around them over time.
Okay. So like if you have a household where most people are pretty energy conscious, someone who's initially not so energy conscious might start to adopt those more efficient habits just because of the influence of the people around them.
Right. Exactly. Or vice versa. If you have a household where most people are pretty wasteful, then it might be harder for one person to maintain those energy saving habits.
Okay, yeah. So the social context matters.
Yeah, it definitely plays a role.
Okay, that's really cool. So then we have the third and final layer, which is the messaging intervention submodel.
Right.
And this is where that core idea of the research, the non-intrusive messaging, this is where that's actually simulated.
Exactly. This is where it all comes.